One of the things that I have learned is that if I don't consciously, intentionally work to declutter my life, my office, my world, my heart, that it won't declutter accidentally. That's not the way clutter works. Clutter doesn't just fix itself. Clutter doesn't just magically wipe away. No, I have to make a conscious effort. I have to intentionally shift my attention. I have to schedule it on a to-do list. I have to bribe myself for the reward. If I want to actually declutter, it's going to take some intentionality. I mean, honestly, the reason why I'm talking about that is not because my office is a mess, although it actually is. It's kind of funny doing these videos because I can point the camera in a way where you don't necessarily see what's on my floor or the things that are around me. But I understand that sometimes life happens and things get cluttered. But I always have these moments when the clutter eventually gets to a point where I can no longer take it. It's starting to actually damage me and my ability to produce, and I then have to intentionally declutter. I think that's actually what Paul is talking to Timothy about in 2 Timothy chapter 2. I think Paul is looking at Timothy and he's saying this, listen, you have false teachers that have come among you, but God has prepared great things and desires for you to engage them, to do them. But first, Timothy, you need to take inventory of all the ways in which you are spiritually cluttered. You need to work intentionally to declutter yourselves spiritually. You need to work intentionally to wipe out the things that are not necessary and that are actually not producing any sort of fruit toward your calling. You need to declutter spiritually to prepare yourself for the things that God is calling you to do. Where do I get that? Well, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22 and following, it's in the context of false teachers. False teachers have come among them. They are making Timothy's ministry in Ephesus more difficult. And Paul looks at him and he says this in verse 22. He says, hey, Timothy, you need to make sure that you flee the evil desires of your youth. Don't be foolish. Don't be chasing after things that you've learned have no value. No, set your evil desires aside. Don't let them clutter your vision. And you need to then instead intentionally pursue. Pursue is intentional. It is not incidental. Pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. And then he says something that, frankly, whenever I read it this morning, I thought, whoa, does that hit 2021? Does that hit 2020? Does that hit the 21st century post-social media pretty intensely? He says, verse 23, don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. He's saying, Timothy, declutter yourself from the things that guide you not towards God, but towards more and more clutter, more and more quarrels. It's interesting because Paul, he reminds Timothy, he exhorts Timothy to this a couple of times in just the verses that led up to verse 22. In verse 14, listen to what Paul says here. He says, warn them before God. He's talking about reminding God's people of important things. He says, warn them before God against quarreling about words. It has no value, Paul says, and it only ruins those who listen. Go down to verse 16. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. Have you noticed this in social media or on conversations with Christians about politics? The amount of quarrels that happen over words. That's not what he said. You took that out of context. Paul just says, it's not a value. And it only ruins those who listen. We think we're just having a conversation. But in a real sense, the conversations typically are having us. He says, avoid the godless chatter. Why? Because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. The conversations that we're having and the quarrels that we're fighting transform us into the very clutter that God is calling us to remove. He says, Timothy, verse 23, don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your energy. You're getting distracted from your calling. Because you know they produce quarrels, verse 24. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. And for those of you that are addicted to, political conversations and social media, please just listen to verse 25 and take it seriously. Opponents must be gently instructed, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. Listen, we vilify opponents all the time, but typically we do not approach our opponents with gentle instruction, with grace and desire for them to be transformed. We do not typically pursue them to help rescue them, to help introduce them to Jesus, to help free them from their master who has ensnared them. No, we typically pursue our opponents, whether with words, whether with posts, or whether with political opinions, to win an argument, but not to win their souls. Friends, this is my challenge for you this week. Help change the church by intentionally choosing to declutter yourself spiritually. I'm not asking you to fast from social media, although maybe you need to. But I am asking you to stop engaging in foolish and stupid arguments. Maybe what you need to fast from is from political conversations. Maybe what you need to fast from is from the news. Try it for a month and see how it changes who you are. Because ultimately, the mission that Christ has called us to is far more valuable than any argument that you might win. So please take Paul's advice and work this week to declutter yourself spiritually. Because apparently, it matters for the mission. I love you guys. Have a good week.